The Doosan 225 traces its roots back to the Solar 220 LCV. From the 1990s into the early 2000s, Doosan's excavators still wore the Solar badge, and the 220 LCV was the workhorse of that era's 22-ton class. Later, Doosan tore up the whole product line and rebuilt it, switching everything over to the DX naming scheme. And the Solar 220 LCV became the first-generation DX225LC around 2007. From there, the family rolled on generation after generation, from the DX225LC to the 3, the 5, the 7, and on to today's most advanced version, the 7X. The Doosan 225 also changed its name along the way. In the early days, it was the Doosan DX225, and because that was a mouthful out on site, people just shortened it to 225. Later, when Doosan spun off its construction equipment business, it raised a brand new banner called DEVELON, and on the very same series, the lettering on the machine's nameplate changed accordingly. The machine was still the same machine though. The underlying design and the performance philosophy didn't shift much. What follows lays out this family's nearly 2 decades of history, its strengths and weaknesses, the nicknames it picked up on the job site, and a few things worth telling from start to finish. The first generation DX225LC came out swinging the moment it launched. The first impression it gave was tough, strong, and reasonably priced. Among the imported excavators of that era, the Japanese machines leaned expensive and the American and European ones leaned even more expensive, while this Korean brand, Doosan, sat right in the sweet spot in the middle. The performance was no joke, and the price was within reach, which instantly matched the appetite of a huge number of small and mid-sized contractors. The 2 letters LC refer to the long crawler undercarriage. Beyond the standard LC, the first generation split off into several versions. There was the wider track LCA made for that soft, muddy ground, using broader crawlers to spread the machine's ground pressure out so it wouldn't sink. There was the narrow track NLC sold mainly into Europe, where the old town alleys or tight railway worksites are cramped, so the machine had to slim down a notch to fit through. And there was the menacing-looking DX225LL, the long front demolition type with a front end stretched way out, built specifically for tearing down buildings. By the 3 and 5 generations, Doosan was steadily turning up the dial on the engine, the hydraulics, and cab comfort. The 5 in particular was when the family's derivative models spread out the widest, beyond the usual LC, LCA, and NLC. Doosan rolled out a whole batch of specialized machines in one go. There was the long-reach version for dredging rivers, scooping out reservoirs, and clearing harbors. There was the even more extreme super long reach, the SLR, whose maximum working distance reaches roughly 15 meters. Far enough that you can stand on the bank and dig the silt out of the middle of the river. There was the MH material handler version for grabbing scrap in steel yards, ports, and recycling stations with a cab that rises up entirely, so you can look down while you work. There was the demolition version fitted with breakers and high-reach demolition arms. And there was the forestry version for logging operations, with a cab fitted with falling object guards and a dedicated forestry door, plus a reinforced undercarriage, all to guard against falling trees. Carrying the load today is the DX225LC7. The current mainstay model. The most advanced version in the whole family is the DX225 LC7X. This X version is among the first machines in the world from DEVELON to use full electro-hydraulic control. That system, called FEH, basically replaces the old approach of routing commands stage by stage through hydraulic pilot lines with electrical signals giving the orders directly, which makes the response faster and the control more precise. On top of that, you can option it with a whole string of assist features. 2D grade assist, which automatically manages the height of the bucket to carve out a level slope. Auto grade and lift assist both included, and a genuinely useful virtual wall, which lets you draw an invisible boundary in the system so the working equipment stops automatically the moment it touches that line and won't cross over. Something that prevents plenty of trouble when you are working amid dense underground utilities or right up against a building. The high-spec configuration can even tie into Leica's 3D guidance system. With a setup like that, the DX225 LC7X doesn't really feel like a traditional excavator anymore. It is more like a smart work platform that happens to have a hydraulic arm. Here is one thing worth untangling because a lot of people get it mixed up. Does the 225 have a wheeled version or not? The answer is that, strictly by the manufacturer's official naming, there is no standard model called the DX225W. Doosan's naming has its logic, with crawler machines and wheeled machines running on two separate lines. In the same 22-ton class, the mainstay on the crawler side is the DX225LC, while the corresponding wheeled machine was the DX210W in the early days, then moved up to the DX230W, and on to the DX235W7. In other words, the wheeled machine that actually goes head-to-head with the DX225LC7 is the DX230W7 and the DX235W7. There is no such thing as a factory DX225W, but the used market doesn't fuss over this. Dealers can't be bothered to split hairs over model numbers. So when they see a 22-ton wheeled excavator, they just call it a DX225 wheel digger or a DX225W. And once that has been said enough times, outsiders genuinely start to believe the model exists, especially in Russia, Eastern Europe, and parts of the Middle East. Dealers flat out translate and market the DX230W as a DX225W. But if you flip open the manufacturer's parts catalog or service manual, or just glance down at the nameplate on the machine, what is written there is still DX210W, DX230W, or DX235W. So the next time someone mentions a DX225W to you, keep it in mind. That is a street name, not an official model. With the background out of the way, let's talk about how it earned its place on the job site. The Doosan 225's biggest asset comes down to one word: balance. It isn't like some Japanese machines that push speed to the limit but turn out to be fussy about fuel quality and maintenance. And it isn't like some machines that have plenty of muscle but drink fuel like crazy. Its strength is that no single area falls short. The digging force is plenty. The hydraulic response isn't slow. The whole machine's stability and reliability are both there. And most importantly, it is durable, easy to maintain, and affordable. For a small operator making a living off his machine, that no obvious weak spot sense of reassurance counts for more than anyone's standout figure. It is tagged along with countless work crews building roads, digging mines, and putting up buildings, the kind of machine that doesn't draw much attention day to day but rarely lets you down. Of course, there is no such thing as a flawless machine, and the Doosan 225 has its well-known old ailments too. The one brought up most is that some early production batches had electrical systems and sensors that, in the damp, dirty, dust-heavy job sites common in many markets, would occasionally act up with loose wiring connections and false sensor alarms and the like. Then there is the hydraulic system, which, when it has been run a long time and maintenance falls behind, will leak oil, slow down, and start tracking crooked. Though that is honestly not unique to Doosan. What 20-plus ton machine that is logged over 10,000 hours doesn't leak a little oil with the highly intelligent 7X? The trouble just takes a different shape. The more complex the electronics and software get, the more troubleshooting comes to depend on professional diagnostic computers and factory engineers, unlike the old models, where a veteran mechanic could nail the problem pretty much dead on just by feel and by ear. That is the tuition you have to pay for going intelligent. On the market side, the Doosan 225 situation is worth talking about. In the new machine market, it has taken a real beating these past few years from lower-cost domestic challengers in many markets, which are now both cheap and capable and have stirred the entire mid-tier into a churning mess. But Doosan, riding on the reputation and the large installed base it has built up over the years, still holds its ground fairly steadily within the Korean and foreign brand tier. Where you really see what it is made of is the used market. The Doosan 225 is solid hard currency second-hand, especially the DX225LC5 and DX225LC7 generations. Large installed base parts easy to find. Repair techs mostly know them inside out, and once it is listed, it sells fast. People buying used are after peace of mind. And the Doosan 225's trait of being something you can buy and put straight to work, then flip later without losing much, fits that need exactly. How users rate it says a lot about where it sits, too. Operators generally find it easy to handle and not picky about who is running it. The controls are smooth, a beginner won't panic behind the levers, and a veteran finds it comfortable as well. Fuel consumption is kept in good check, and its working ability rates upper middle. The kind of thing you can count on. The bosses put it more bluntly: few problems, cheap to fix, and it holds its value. An honest, hard-working moneymaker. There are pickier voices too, who'll say its feel is a touch less refined than the top Japanese machines. and that its speed and precision aren't quite top of the heap. But then again, for most of the people making a living off it, getting the money earned steadily and reliably is what matters most. On upkeep and after sales, Doosan's progress over the years is plain to see. In the early days, its service network and parts supply lagged behind the old brands that had spent decades digging into established markets, and out in remote areas you'd wait days for a part. But as the installed base spread wider and wider, that weak spot gradually got filled in. These days, original parts, aftermarket parts, and salvaged parts are all easy enough to find and not pricey, and plenty of independent repair shops know Doosan's common faults cold and know exactly where to start. As for ease of maintenance, Doosan's design has always been practical. The engine bay and the various filters are all laid out where you can reach them easily. So for routine oil and filter changes, you stand on the ground or step up on a foothold and get it done. No clambering up and down. With the newer 7 and 7X generations, they've also added remote management, pushing the machine's operating status, maintenance reminders, and fault warnings straight to the manager's phone. So upkeep shifts gradually from fix it once it breaks to head it off in advance. A few words on the story behind this family. The one thing most worth telling about the Doosan 225 is that collective name change. Plenty of old hands still haven't quite wrapped their heads around it. It is obviously the same Orange series. So how did it suddenly go from Doosan to DEVELON? Here is how it happened. Doosan Group expanded over the years by acquiring brands like the American company Bobcat. And then, in a major shareholding shakeup, the construction equipment business got carved off and needed a brand new, independent identity separate from the Doosan parent name. So around 2022, the name DEVELON came into being. The name is said to be a blend of develop and on, which carries a pretty upbeat meaning. But to the guys out on site, whether you call it Doosan or DEVELON, what they recognize is that streak of orange and that familiar temperament. So head to the used market now and you'll catch an amusing sight, cars from the same family. The older ones lettered Doosan and the newer ones lettered DEVELON, parked side by side for sale. There is one more thing worth mentioning, where the Doosan 225's engine comes from. Doosan has its own foundation and powertrains, and a fair number of its excavators run on Doosan's own in-house engines, which isn't all that common among excavator makers, since plenty of brands buy their engines from outside. Being able to build its own engines means the whole machine tuning, the fuel economy optimization, and the repair and parts supply when something goes wrong can all be pulled together under one roof. That is one of the underlying reasons the Doosan 225 has managed to hold such a steady course down the worry-free and durable road. 2 decades on for an excavator model is long enough to carry it from its early days all the way to maturity. Long enough that even its name changed once. From the first generation DX225LC, born out of the Solar 220LCV, to today's DX225LC7X, which carries sensors, can set a virtual wall, and can grade with precision from inside an air-conditioned cab. It has watched the whole arc of the excavator industry move from purely mechanical and purely hydraulic toward electronic control and toward intelligence. It may not be the flashiest machine out there. Its speed isn't the fastest, its muscle isn't the strongest, and its price tag isn't the highest. But it is reliable enough and solid enough that it became the machine countless work crews swear by year after year. Performance that doesn't show off, every scoop dug solid, every day's work wrapped up with peace of mind. That streak of orange changed its signboard, but it never changed that reassuring, dependable nature, and that is probably the real reason it has been able to roll steadily down this road for a full 20 years.